So what do you need to consider to make sure you're safe and code compliant when drilling holes through your studs for your electrical projects around the house? So we'll use this project as a demonstration. It's a bathroom rehab project where I needed to do some drywall repairs. So I used some scrap flooring and my oscillating tool to cut a nice straight line across to get that damaged drywall out. Well, this also opened up a great path for me to run new Romex, changing the light location for the vanity light from the ceiling to the wall. To do this effectively, of course, I needed to drill through some studs, so let's talk about what I consider to make sure I'm code compliant and staying away from any issues with inspection. So the first of the two main things you consider when actually positioning your bit to drill through a 2x4 is how close can you be to the edge of the 2x4. Two main codes that we'll take into consideration. The first is building code, and this is associated more to the structure of your home. Make sure you're not compromising the structural integrity of a load-bearing or non-load-bearing wall. For this one, it calls out your hole should not be closer than 5/8 of an inch to the outside edge of that stud. This is usually pretty easy to meet because there's a stricter standard, and that one is called out by NEC, and that is 1.25 inches. So your hole cannot be closer than 1.25 inches to the outside surface, and let me show you why. So the stricter NEC code of 1.25 inches is really driven by wanting to protect this Romex. With modern building construction and a 1/2 inch drywall, 1.25 inches are your most common drywall screws, but 1 5/8 you'll see used commonly as well. So what that means is if that 1/2 inch drywall was secured with 1.25 inches, you'd have 3/4 of an inch of the screw penetrating into the stud. So obviously this clearance is going to be plenty, but even for that 1 5/8, you're going to have 1 1/8 of an inch of the screw penetrating into the stud, and that is going to protect it and be within the envelope called out by the NEC to make sure the screw is not puncturing or contacting your non-metallic Romex. So the second thing we need to consider is how much material can we remove, or how big of a hole can we drill through the stud. Now remember, I'm giving you my experience. I'm not a licensed electrician, and you need to check in your own area. For instance, in Chicago, you can't even usually run Romex. You need to use conduit. Check with your local inspector to make sure you don't hit any snags on your project as you get going. Now when it comes to drilling through the studs, I prefer these Irwin speed bore bits. It's a fast, smooth hole, and it doesn't have any blowout on the backside. I like these small 4-inch, and you'll see in my Amazon store, I have an assortment 6-pack that I bought, and that's what I've been using on these projects. And then if I need more length, I just get these quick disconnects. This one's specifically from Diablo, which will give me that length, and then I can vary the length of all the different bore sizes of my 4-inch speed bore. So it just works well for me, and that's the setup, and that's what I recommend on my Amazon store. But your other options are a standard spade bit, which I did drill some larger holes we'll talk about here in a second, why I went larger, or just a classic auger bit. I use this one more on deck projects to drill out holes for like carriage bolts. But the code requirement you need to go to for the size of hole is I go the conservative route of never removing more than 40% of the stud. Now, in terms of building code, sometimes you can go up to 60%, especially if that's a non-load-bearing wall, or if you have doubled up studs, sometimes you can go a little bigger. That's a little bit more common in plumbing, maybe when you're running a vent line through a wall cavity to get it where you need in the attic. So the 40%, that is going to associate to 1 3/4 of an inch on a standard 3.5 inch wide stud. So you could go up to 1 3/8 inches, but remember, if you're drilling out 1 3/8 inches in the middle of the stud, you're going to start conflicting with that 1.25 inch clearance, especially if you have drywall on both sides of that wall. So you need to consider the edge requirement that we talked about, and also the hole size requirement. Now the most common hole that I go with is 3/4 of an inch. Drill 3/4 of an inch, and that gives me plenty of room for 1 or 2 pieces of Romex. And the last thing I want to touch on is what other options do you have to increase the safety to make sure that your Romex is never getting damaged. So for the holes drilled through these 2 studs making up the corner here, that was actually 1 1/8 of an inch. You can see that hole is actually within the envelope that we should be keeping clear of 1.25 inches to the edge surface. So an inspector could fail me for that issue. To correct that issue, you can get these nail plates that are 1/16 of an inch wide, and those would go right on the outside surface of the stud, and then you just hammer those in place. And now you have protection for any screws or nails that would want to come through. They're going to hit the plate, the nail plate, before puncturing through the stud and possibly damaging your Romex. So these plates can be another factor of safety because remember, we talked about drywall screws, but depending on where your Romex is going, somebody might be sinking a much larger fastener into that stud if they're hanging a shelf or hanging something that needs to hold a load. And these are just a safer way to go about it, putting a plate on each stud where you have holes and where you have Romex running through. And let me show you the last option, which I ran across recently, which I think is pretty cool. So local Menards, which is a large home improvement store here in the Midwest, have these easy guards. So that actually lines the hole here, the hole that you drilled out, and that's why I drilled out the 1 1/8. That is the side needed for these easy guards, but it lines it with your nailer plate opposed to putting that nailer plate on the outside surface. So all you do is place that within the 1 1/8 inch of a hole, give it a little tap. And now you have a plastic bushing and also an integrated nailer plate. So if any fasteners came from the outside, they would hit that metal housing opposed to your Romex. These make for a super clean and well protected install, and you'll see a link in the description to these just in case you don't have a Menards in your area. So let me know what comments you have, and specifically in your area, are there different codes or regulations that run contrary to what we overviewed here? And then just another point is the price. So 58 cents for these plates and about 81 cents if I bought a pack of 25 from Menards for these Easy Guards. Now, some of the instances you need 2 plates, 1 on each side, so the Easy Guard could actually be cheaper. Now, if you want to avoid the 5 DIY electrical mistakes I've made over the past few years, check out this video right here, and I'll quickly run through the mistakes I made that the commenters and viewers pointed out. So thanks for joining me on this video, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care.